Breaking news, the government is proposing scrapping NCEA and replacing it with a new national qualification.
NCEA Level 1 is to be replaced with foundation, literacy and numeracy tests.
Level 2 and 3 will get a rebrand and slimmed down with more emphasis on vocational pathways.
No more achieved, not achieved, merit and excellence. Instead, there will be marks out of 100 and letter grades like A, B and C.
Under the changes, you need to pass things. How wonderfully old-fashioned. If you don't pass, you don't advance. Therefore, when you do pass, it actually counts. It means something. You have achieved something.
For more than 20 years, NCEA was the country's official secondary school qualification. But now the pin's being pulled and it will be gone by 2030. Teachers are saying, tai hoa, they're calling for calm debate and a confirmed curriculum first. But critics and many parents are delighted, saying NCEA missed the mark and deserves an F at best.
Having watched NCEA in action with 5 kids, it has been shocking. Virtually anyone could get it, and that was and is never a good thing.
I went to school when it was ABC, so that'll make more sense to me.
My son's struggling at the moment with the current system.
I think the education system needed a big turnover.
Yeah, I think it does need to change because it's likely a lot of other children are struggling with it as well.
But what does it mean for those who thrive doing NCEA?
I need to understand how are we going to ensure that we meet the diverse needs of our learners.
I feel like it's kind of like negating all the work we've done.
I don't think a full revamp of completely overhauling everything is really needed.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies and today on The Detail, the changes to our education system. What's in, what's out, who's impacted, who supports it, who doesn't, and why now? To answer everything you need to know, I put an education guru to the test.
I'm John Gerritsen and I'm the education correspondent for RNZ.
Excellent, John. Now, this is going to be like an exam today. How confident are you feeling? What grade are you expecting?
Look, I'm going to go for an achieved or expect an achieved, but I've got hopes that I might get to merit.
Oh, we'll find out in 30 minutes. Let's start with the basics then. John, what are the key changes to the NCEA that sort of students, parents and teachers need to know about right now?
Okay, well, I think what families need to know is that anyone who's in Year 8 this year or below, so that's the final year of intermediate school, so what used to be Form 2, they will be the first students to go through what's being billed as the replacement for NCEA, which means that when they reach Year 11 in 2028, there will not be an NCEA Level 1 waiting for them. Instead, there'll be a foundational award in literacy and numeracy, and the following year, rather than doing NCEA Level 2, they'll have a New Zealand Certificate of Education, and in their final year of school, 2030, they'll be the first students to attempt the New Zealand Advanced Certificate of Education, the qualification that's replacing NCEA Level 3. So all of that unveiled by the government. Everyone knew the government was looking very hard at Level 1 and the demise of Level 1 was pretty widely expected, but it's went a lot further than that by deciding to replace Levels 2 and 3 as well.
Why is the government doing this?
Well, I think on one level you'd have to say a qualification system that's been in place since 2002, so over 20 years, and still confuses people, probably needs to be revised pretty heavily. People will talk you through the way NCEA works, and it makes sense in that you're giving students credit for what they can do. If they can achieve a standard, you give them the tick, you give them the award. But some of the way the way this has been described, it's been a bit obtuse, and people have struggled to understand it over the years. So that's one of the reasons for getting rid of it. But I think if you talk to teachers, it doesn't take long to figure out that the utopian ideal of NCEA has run up against teenage behaviour, which is if I don't earn credits for something, a credit towards a qualification, I'm not going to bother with it. So the idea is that you teach students a subject and you assess some of it, what you do tend to hear from teachers is that only the bits they assess are the bits that the teenagers, the kids are really paying attention to, and so therefore you end up with kids not bothering to learn all of a subject. So that, that's one of the big criticisms of the system. But also there was a review by the Education Review Office recently that looked at level 1, and it said, look, there just isn't the consistency between schools or the confidence even amongst teachers that it's a decent award, and some of those concerns extended into levels 2 and 3 if you talk to people in the sector. So there was sort of this widespread concern about how much of a subject students were learning. When the Education Minister announced the change on Monday, she talked quite a bit about how students might be picking a range of different assessment standards across a range of different subjects, and it didn't really add up to a coherent whole. Now, whether that's really true or whether it was students actually building a qualification that meant something to them is definitely up for debate. But those are some of the reasons that were being given.
So, in a real layman's term, say I'm a Year 9 student going in to do NCEA next year. How would that differ from a Year 9 student going into the new changes in 2028?
If you're going in to do the final year of NCEA, you're going to be able to pick and choose what assessments you do a little bit more. Once you've got enough credits, say 60 credits, you don't have to do any more to get your certificate. So you might say, I'm not going to my end of year exam. Now, it's not quite clear how this is going to work for the new qualification, but it seems the government is very keen that students don't pick and choose which assessments they do, and they don't get the option of skipping those end of year exams if they don't need them. So that's going to be one of the biggest ones. They'll be expected to do 5 subjects. For each of those subjects, they're going to have to do assessment that covers a broad range of topics within that subject. So there's probably going to be more assessment.
So do you think, you've done education for a long time, do you think these changes will, genuinely lift, the literacy and numeracy of our kids, or are they shuffling the deck chairs a wee bit?
Well, I think the literacy numeracy criticism, a lot of that cannot be left at the door of NCEA, because young people should have learnt to read, write and do maths by the time they get to secondary school. And, you talk to principals and teachers, particularly in poorer communities, and a lot of their students are not turning up able to read, write and do maths. So blaming NCEA for the decline in those basic skills, I'm not sure that's entirely fair. But certainly, immediately after these announcements, I went into a staff room and had a chat to a few teachers, and, there was a certain amount of optimism and also acceptance that things needed to change, but it's going to come at a cost. There's a real concern that the way NCEA was structured, you could ensure that a lot of students gain credit for what they could do, and under these proposed changes, there could be a greater proportion leaving with no qualifications at all. And that's the big concern, is that it's going to be less flexible and less able to recognise a wide range of student achievement.
Well, that's the thing, because I know a lot of parents who've got children with special needs. They might be on the spectrum, or, they might have dyslexia or whatever. They're really worried about these changes. Should they be, from what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely, because there is a whole swathe of young people who struggle with exams, and some of them may have dyslexia, others may just simply have anxiety about doing exams. There's also issues around increasing shifts to computer-based exams for students who don't have much to do with computers. So this is definitely going to become an issue, because the consultation paper has said that students will be strongly incentivised to do exams. And there is a feeling in some quarters that, exams are more accurate as a measure of student achievement. And I know plenty of teachers will come back just as hard against that and saying that they're not a fair assessment. So, yeah, there definitely is concern for students who struggle. And, if I think back, everyone thinks about their own school days. I used to have no trouble with exams until that one time I turned up in an exam and had a complete blank and barely passed. And that sort of brought it home to me. Yeah, it's a snapshot of how good you are on the day. And if you don't have a good day, you could end up with a result that is nothing like what your ability is.
Not reflecting your year. So what about pushback from principals, teachers, students? What are you hearing?
It's probably a little bit early at this stage because they need a lot more detail around what the government means by some of these changes that we're proposing. But look, one of the big ones is, okay, let's look at the current way that achievement is recognised. You either achieve a standard or you don't, and if you do achieve, you could get merit or excellence. Now, the government's saying, okay, we'll get rid of that, and fair enough, people have found it quite hard to understand achieve, merit and excellence, so A, B and C will be the replacement, but they'll be marking out of 100. Now, teachers have said to me, hang on a minute, this is still going to be, we're told, a standards-based system. A mark out of 100 makes no sense. So they've got big question marks about that. The other issue that's been raised with me is, will students be able to build their qualification over multiple years? And this is a big one for schools in poorer communities with students who've come in, behind the eight ball in terms of their learning. They really like being able to work over several years on their qualification. So you might leave in year 13 with level 2 of NCEA. Now, the consultation document said, well, students might be able to complete their qualification over multiple years in some cases, and it talked about situations where students, perhaps their learning was interrupted by their health. That would ring alarm bells, I think, in a lot of schools, because it suggests that ability to build a qualification over multiple years is only going to be available in exceptional circumstances, and that is not going to help their students.
And teachers, he says, have their red pens poised over another point in the consultation document.
One of the interesting little warning signs in the consultation document, it did say that achievement's likely to decline in the short term when they make this change. Now, it did say when the Australian state of Victoria made a change to its qualification system, that bounced back. The extent to which it'll bounce back remains to be seen, but I know talking to principals from poorer communities, they're really worried that a system that has helped their communities achieve success is going to be got rid of and replaced with something with big question marks around it. And so there's real worries that young people from poorer backgrounds are going to be disadvantaged by this, and they're less likely to leave school with some sort of qualification. And I think also one of the things here, you do seem to feel there is this desire to make sure that everyone's being compared on a level playing field, so that, say, your kid heading off to university and off to study calculus and do a PhD has to do as much work as a kid who's perhaps choosing some other pathway. But there is a sort of sense that maybe this new system is trying to apply a way of working that might suit the kids in the leafy suburbs and not so much the kids in the poor areas.
Now, these changes, John, do you think the Minister and the Ministry has communicated them well, or has there been a bit of a disconnect? What's your take? Yeah,
I think there is a lot of detail that is yet to be provided. And I think the really big thing here is that the government is moving very quickly to introduce new curriculums. And it actually just this week announced it was going to delay that work and stagger introduction of the senior secondary school curriculums because of teacher feedback that they're just getting overwhelmed by this. So I think there is a situation here where the government has been moving quite fast, and teachers are very much saying this is going to be a lot of work. We're going to need good support. Now, when the government was making changes to NCEA Level 1 a few years ago, there was generally recognised that that was very, very poorly implemented. And so whatever happens with this has got to be done a lot better.
But I found it interesting that there's only a 6-week consultation for it. Is that enough? Or, like you say, things have been moving so quickly and it's a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I have talked to people who've said that 6-week consultation is nowhere near enough. And the other point they've made is that they shouldn't even be consulting on this yet because schools do not have the curriculums. They haven't even seen the draft curriculums for most subjects. So what they're wanting is the curriculums to be completed and in place and then look at the qualification. This is a bit of cart before horse.
Do we know, the big question, how much is going to cost?
Yeah, well, that's going to be really interesting. And how much of it is really actually replacing NCEA and how much is building on NCEA? Because one of the things that's happened is that the previous government, and this government continued it, were already moving to reform NCEA. So they made changes to NCEA Level 1, which Aero last year said had not gone very well, but it spent $157 million over the course of 3 or 4 years on all of this. That's a heck of a lot of money and a lot of work, and the intent of those reforms was to have more externally assessed standards and fewer standards that covered more subject matter so that students would learn more broadly in their subject so that they wouldn't miss out key knowledge, all the things that this reform is supposed to do. So there is a suspicion in some quarters that actually what's being proposed, much of it was proposed already. So how much of this is entirely new, we're not entirely sure, and it's going to percolate out as the consultation goes on, I think.
One of the things I found interesting, John, and perhaps a little bit alarming at the same time, so I want your take on this, the use of AI for marking.
Education Minister Erica Stanford announcing that school exam marking will be aided by the use of AI, taking the responsibility away from teachers. Are we opening a can of worms here?
I think you'll find in a few years' time that'll be the way many teachers are working. That statement from the minister that the use of AI for marking was going to enable a lot of this change to happen and take a lot of workload from teachers. I talked to an AI expert earlier today about that. She said schools are nowhere near ready to do that. There's a lot of pitfalls still, and they're not getting anywhere near enough support from the Education Ministry and others about how to use AI and so forth. They need a lot more training. But, I did talk to another principal who said, look, you can use AI even, to mark kids' speeches and performances. It's quite a phenomenal technology for teachers, as long as you know what its failings are and are looking out for those, and you can give it the right instructions so that it will mark accurately. It can mark accurately.
Kiwi comedians and actors like Jordan Rivers have been marking Education Minister Erica Stanford's announcement. And with no AI used, Jordan posted his efforts on social media and it's taken off.
As a parent, I didn't understand NCEA.
As a student, I did.
After years of helping my daughter through it, it just never made sense.
You helped your daughter for years and you still didn't get it. How did you... It took you years to not get it. I only got an assembly and intermediate and I got it.
Why an E is better than an A?
Because E stands for excellence and A stands for achieved. They're not just random letters, Erica. They stand for words. It's excellence and it's what the... No wonder you didn't get it.
Why do you get credits for part-time jobs?
Erica, you had a version of the exact same thing under school cert, which is what you studied because you were born in the 70s, I googled. But also the National Party introduced some of that.
Why do kids say they don't need to sit exams because they've already got enough credits?
Because they're nerds and they've got enough credits. They told you why.
Half of parents don't understand NCEA.
You mean half of parents? I can't find that statistic anywhere. What do you mean? The dad?
Now I'm curious, and I want you to be honest. If you take off your education reporter's hat and put your dad hat on, did you actually understand NCEA when the kids were doing it?
Yeah, look, I have to admit, I did, because I've done, but that's because I do so much with as an education correspondent, and talking to other parents. They did struggle with it. It takes some effort to understand, but when I've talked to employers groups, they've said, oh yes, NCEA, we do understand it, but that's at the top level. You do hear from individual employers, they struggle with it. So yeah, it has not been a clear system for anybody to understand.
Students can patch together random credits.
I feel like you're trying to make addition sound complicated. You mean taking one group of numbers plus another group of numbers to make one larger number? Yeah, that's addition. Should have done that before you got to NCEA.
We're proposing to replace NCEA with a simpler, clearer qualification.
No, you're not. What you're actually doing is creating a problem where there isn't one so that you can slyly get rid of allocations of money set aside for things like cultural studies, Māori studies and the arts. I mean, it's really not that hard to see. In fact, it's almost as easy to understand as NCEA.
Now, the NCEA system, as an education reporter, how would you grade that?
Jeepers. It's tough, isn't it? I think in terms of a public relations campaign, it's not achieved. It's just never managed to win public confidence, I guess you'd say. But in terms of recognising achievement for a greater number of students, it's got to have been a success. It's certainly achieved that. I mean, I was just looking at figures. I mean, it peaked at around 90% of school leavers back in 2016 had at least level 1. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, the latest school leaver attainment figures actually came out today, and they showed that 16% of last year's school leavers had no NCEA qualification. That's the worst figure in a decade. So, if you talk to principals about that, about at least ensuring students have got some credit for what they've learned, it's been a success. But it just has not won the confidence of the wider public, and it's always been an easy target.
Do you think that some of our kids must feel like guinea pigs because, in recent years they've had COVID, they've had homeschooling, they've had open classrooms, they've got a new maths curriculum, they've got the upcoming changes now, the other changes to level 1. I mean, how tough is this, John, on our students?
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. But I do wonder if they're like they're the frogs in the water. They're not realising that the temperature's changing. It's the teachers who are seeing the change. The kids are just doing what's in front of them. But definitely, I think the literacy and numeracy requirement, that's been a big one for teenagers and causing a lot of stress. And I think there'll be a certain amount of anxiety among students who are finishing with the NCEA that, hang on, am I the final year of a qualification that no one's valuing very much? And I was talking to a principal earlier today who said actually it's really important to remind kids it's good. It's still, it's a good qualification. It's fine. We're just looking at improving it. The concerns that are driving these changes seem to be around increasing consistency and closing up some of the gaps that some students have. But they're not gaps that all students have.
See, that was one thing that one of the students raised in a story is that, in a few years' time, is her NCEA going to mean nothing?
Yeah, well, you'd certainly hope that that's not the case.
And what about looking ahead, though? These changes that will potentially be in place, what about in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Do you worry that they could be reversed depending on, say, who's in power?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely critical. There's been, for 20-odd years, this sort of agreement across Parliament's benches that we'll just stick with the NCEA. We're not going to muck around with it. Now, as I say, they're wanting to keep standards-based assessment, which is the basis for NCEA. So it's not quite clear how much of a revolution this is. But certainly the Labour Party has been saying they need to look at it a bit more before they know whether or not it's something that they would stick with. But if it's more of a refinement than a revolution, then it's probably got a better chance of sticking around. I mean, I think it's quite interesting requiring students to pass at least 4 out of 5 subjects and study a coherent course of study for each subject. I think teachers are going to like that, but there are a few students for who it's not going to work.
Now, we have come to the end of your exam, John. I'm curious, what grade would you give yourself?
Oh, golly, I got a bit waffly there. I mean, I've just achieved. If you're kind to me, if you're a kind teacher, you'll give me achieve. But I don't know, you might need me to do a reset.
For the record, I'll give John Gerritsen an E for excellence. Thanks, John. That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.